G'day MBM, I'm Dave. It's great to be back here with you again. What a privilege to be here on the week of Ray's 60th birthday. As a special birthday present, I thought I'd come back and give you a present of my presence here. So it's wonderful to be here with you today. I'm especially happy because the topic we're looking at is one which I'm convinced is close to all of our hearts. I know it's close to mine, and that is the subject of relationships. In other words, how we relate to one another. I don't know what your experience of relationships has been, but if it's anything like mine, there's relationships in your life which have caused incredible good, but also there's ones that have been incredibly damaging. Probably when I think back to my childhood, the best relationship that I got to experience was that of my parents. Here's a photograph of them, my dad looking a bit like Buddy Holly, and my mother also looking a little bit like Buddy Holly there. I guess it was the fashion of the time. They've been married for 51 years, and their relationship was one of love and trust and generosity. And it had a huge impact on my childhood, so much so that when I think back to my early years, I don't think of things that we did or places that we went. I think of people. I think of them. I think of laughter and love and joy. But I've also had some terrible relationships as well. I became a Christian when I was 28 years old. Around 5 years before that, I went through a divorce. A marriage which had produced 2 children fell apart. Now, as anyone who's been divorced, and maybe it's you, will know, there's no such thing as a painless divorce, and this one was painful. It hurt my ex-wife and me, our families, but also my kids. It was so painful, I don't reckon I could talk about it for probably 10 years. I met my wife, Sammy, after I became a Christian, and I remember talking to her or trying to talk to her about it, and I couldn't. I was so deeply wounded by it all. I wonder if that's been your experience as well. Relationships are these unique things, aren't they? It's this unique thing. It's got the power to cause incredible delight and joy, probably unparalleled to anything else, but also the power to really hurt, to really tear us apart and cause incredible wounding for a long time. The question we're looking at today flows out of those concepts, and it's this: why do you think that is? Why is it that relationships, the way that we relate with one another, has this power to just change our lives for the good or really destroy our lives for the bad? Why is it that relationships give us the highest of highs but also the lowest of lows? And digging into that theme, is it possible that you and I can have relationships that aren't causing havoc and dismay and destruction wherever they go, but are actually defined by love and joy? Can all of our relationships be based around that, having that kind of positive impact in our lives and the lives of others? Well, thankfully, our God is not silent. Our God is a God who speaks. And he speaks to us through the Bible. And in the book of Genesis, which you here at MBM are looking through at the moment, we have the opportunity to see the relationship of the very first people, Adam and Eve, and see what God is up to in bringing them together. But it's not just life tips for us in relationship. There's something deeper going on here today in today's passage. There's something deeply profound as we see some of God's purposes in bringing man and woman, humankind, together to relate. So let's get to it, the book of Genesis. If you don't know anything about the Bible, you're in for a treat today because the book of Genesis is really easy to find. It's the first book of the Bible, and we're at Genesis chapter 2. A few weeks ago, you looked at Genesis chapter 1, which is kind of like a bird's eye overview account of creation. And there's just one part of that account that I want you to remember. And that is, at the end of most of the days of creation, God would kind of sit back and assess his handiwork, and he'd say, it was good. He'd build the stars in the sky. He'd say, this is good. The sea and the animals, this is good. All of those things built up to a crescendo at the end of the 6th day. And on the 6th day, he created people. And he looks back at his handiwork and says, this is very good. So you've got God. He's assessing everything. Good, 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 good. Very good with you and I, with people created in his image. And that's what you'd expect. After all, he's the one who's made all things, and he assesses it very positively. That's the way it goes until the very first verse of our reading today. So have a look, chapter 2, verse 18. I'm going to read it out, just the beginning, but you follow along. The Lord God said, "It is not good So hold on. He's assessed everything he's made, good, good, very good, but now we see it is not good. Not good for what? Continue. It is not good for the man to be alone. So what's not good? Well, it's aloneness, loneliness, isolation. And the more you learn about God, the less that will surprise you. Because our God is a relational God. I don't know what your thoughts are of God. It's pretty common that many people believe God's kind of like the old man with the beard off in the sky, the Wizard of Oz type character who's shut off in a room, we can't possibly know him. But that's not true. God is relational. He wants to know and be known. In fact, that's what he's been doing for eternity with his Son and the Holy Spirit. And so just as he is, so we, image bearers, the ones created in his image, very good, you and I have been made to relate for community. That's why isolation and loneliness is so horrible. Just recently, I was watching a documentary on Netflix that was set in death row in a prison in America. I was just watching this documentary when I noticed something striking that was said. It was interviewing one of the death row prisoners, and he was telling the story about how he got to death row. And he was saying that he got there deliberately. You see, he'd been doing another prison sentence, life with no parole, in isolation. He was in isolation for 23 hours a day, and it was so awful that he committed another crime intentionally in prison. I think he murdered another prisoner or a prison guard or something like that, so that he could be transferred to death row. Why? Because in death row, even though you were guaranteed execution, you got to congregate with other prisoners. This man would rather congregate with other prisoners knowing he would be executed than face the rest of his life isolated and alone. Now, I know that's an extreme example, but those of us who've experienced isolation and loneliness can certainly empathise with them, can't we? I wonder if you've ever experienced it. I remember moving to Darwin when I was in my late 20s. I wasn't a Christian. I knew one bloke in Darwin, Matteo. And I got there and he said, "Call me when you get here, mate." And so I did, and he had his phone off for like 2 days. So I get to Darwin and I don't know anyone. I mean, I knew no one. I wasn't working for a week. And so I spent a week just going to the shops, getting food, eating on my own, spending all my time alone. I could face every single direction for thousands of miles, kilometres, and not know a soul. I can joke about it now, but it was horrible. Loneliness. And maybe right now in the middle of the coronavirus crisis, that's exactly what you're feeling. Isolated, cut off, alone. Maybe you're feeling a deep sense of despair at that. Well, the incredible news here is that despair you're feeling is not random and it's not accidental. It means something. Have a look at the reading, verse 18. Because whilst the illness is loneliness, God has come up with a cure. Look what he says, verse 18. The Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." And in verse 21 to 22, just a little bit down, we read how God puts Adam to sleep, the first man, and takes a rib out, and from that rib creates a woman, the first woman, Eve. And in Eve, the suitable helper that Adam desires is made for him. Now, I know to our 21st century ears, suitable helper sounds like an incredibly demeaning and sexist term, but that's not what the term means. It doesn't mean a maid or the hired help. The term suitable helper is used 16 times in the Bible. 13 of them are about God himself, about his relationship to his people. This is not an expression of superiority, but rather of an equal but different partnership. And can I say, in this marriage and this marriage covenant promise with God at the centre, we see something deeply significant, deeply profound. Adam's desire for relationship being fulfilled completely in Eve, his wife. The big picture, well, we have the illness of loneliness, but God reaching into the middle of it and giving us each other. The cure for loneliness is you and me. We were designed for relationship, to know and to be known, to love and to be loved in return. And I'm not sure if you've picked up what that means yet. But what that means is that whilst other people were designed to fulfill your desire for relationship, you were as well. You are the cure for someone else's illness of loneliness. You are the cure to fulfill someone else. You are designed by God to fulfill that desire for relationship in other people. And my dear friends, whilst we see it uniquely and beautifully in this picture of marriage that we have here in Genesis chapter 2, that's not the only place we see it in the Bible. Not at all. In fact, as the Bible continues, we see it in husband and wife, but also in some incredible friendships. We see it as people interact with each other at work, in neighbours, and ultimately it's fulfilled in the church. The question we're answering today is, why do relationships have so much power over us? The answer is simple, not easy, but simple, and it's this. Because God says the most important thing about your life is relationship. The thing that matters about you is not what's in your bank account. It's not the clothes that you wear, the car that you drive, the job that you do. It's not the success that you tell everyone about, or even your children's success. The thing that matters most about you is people. It's relationship. That's the heart of life. And that's why when relationships are good, it's absolutely incredible. Have you had relationships like that? When you love and are loved in return? It's amazing. But that's why when it's bad, which let's be honest is more often than not, it's horrible. It's horrible to be treated badly. It's horrible to treat other people badly. And that's the deeper question we need to answer today. How do we take this biblical principle, God-given principle, that you and I were created for one another? How do we take that principle and insert it into the relationships that we have? How do we take the principle that we're designed for relationships and see our relationships transformed as a result of it? That we can relate to people in a way that is caring and kind, compassionate, loving and thoughtful, not only if they treat us that way, but regardless of how they do it. Is it possible to live our lives with relationships that are defined not by bitterness, but by beauty? Well, the answer is yes, wonderfully so. That's why God created us that way, not creating us with an unachievable goal, but rather creating us with something that we can do. And wonderfully, He shows us how we do that in the passage. Just have a look at the last stanza that we had read for us. It's this incredible section that is often read in modern marriages, in marriage ceremonies. Jesus quotes it himself. Have a look from verse 23 onwards. Adam says, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother, is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." Pay attention to this last verse. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. Now, there's lots in that little section from Adam, but I just want you to focus on the last thing that was said. Adam and his wife were naked, and they felt no shame. How is it possible that this naked couple have no shame? Well, it's not because their bodies were so incredible with 8 packs and the rest of it, and they were not embarrassed. Okay, that's not what's being said here. No. They have no shame because at this unique time in the Bible, they are living in a sinless relationship. Sin is the rejection of God, the moving Him from the center where He's meant to be and putting yourself in His place. Sin enters into the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3. That's the next chapter. At this point, there is no sin. And because there is no sin, there is no shame. How can there be no shame? Because God is in the center of this relationship where He's meant to be. That's why there's no sin. That's why there's no shame. You see, God has designed human beings to relate to one another, not separate from Him, but with Him in the thick of it, right in the middle, right in the center. And in fact, He's designed us to relate to each other best as a result of the relationship we have from Him. And it's crucial that we don't forget God's presence here. This relationship is an incredible one, but not solely because of the two people involved, but because these two people love God. God is at the center of who they are. And that results in their relationship being this beautiful, incredible thing. My dear friends, this is not a small little point. This isn't a footnote to what we're seeing in this passage. On the contrary, this is enormous. And I do not know where you're at with God in your life. I don't know where you stand. I don't know what your day or what your week, what your month, your year has been like so far. But hear this. This concept, knowing, being known by God at the center of who you are, is what it means to be alive, truly alive. To be living life the way that you designed. It's at the heart of humanity that God has made you to know Him, to be known by Him, and to have that shape how you relate to other people. A little bit later, Jesus, the Son of God, addresses the same thing. In one of his biographies, written by a guy called Matthew, a man comes up to Jesus, and to summarize what the man says, he pretty much says to him, Jesus, what does God want from me? What is life all about? What does God actually want from His people? And Jesus looks at him, and in Matthew 22:37, if you're following along at home, listen to what He says. Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So He tells this guy there's two things to do. Love your neighbor and love God. Now, most of us could agree, of course, loving your neighbor is a wonderful thing to do. It's a great way to live. Relationships in life matter. But all too often we forget the first thing Jesus said. What Jesus says here is that amongst all the relationships in life, it's loving the Lord your God with your heart, your soul, and your mind that matters the most. That's the main thing. And what's most interesting is that whilst most of us would agree relating to other people is important, and even though most of us in Australia claim to believe in God, and the odds are if you're watching today, you might have positive feelings about God. That's what the statistics would say. Most of us spend very little time thinking about Him. We push Him to the side. We leave Him for later in life. We only speak to Him if we want something from Him. In fact, if someone treated us or related to us the way that we relate to God, we'd be furious. And yet that's not how God responds. You see, the very person saying these words, love the Lord your God, is God Himself. It's Jesus. And Jesus came to the earth not because we love God the way we should, but because we don't. Why did Jesus live? Why did He teach and preach and heal? Why did He die and rise from the dead? He did that not because we're perfect relational beings who relate to one another well and relate to God the way we should, but because we don't. Because we all fall short. We all fail. Why should you believe me? Well, my dear friends, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus is the best argument for the truth of what He's saying. Jesus Himself proves the truthfulness of His words. He didn't just say it, He did it. Jesus died on the cross to take the punishment that you and I deserve. Why? So that you and I could be reconciled with God, could go into relationship with Him. And what that means is that at the heart of the universe, something truly incredible is going on. There is a God who made you, who loves you, and who wants to know you. He's moved heaven and earth in order for that to happen. So let's imagine together what this would look like if we live life with these principles in play. I just want you to focus on three quick things. Firstly, focus on the horizontal and the vertical in your life. What do I mean by that? My friends, there is not one relationship in your life that does not need to be done and interacted with through the sphere of your relationship with God. You need to love God first. And because you love God, that will completely transform the way you relate to other people. You will be a better husband, a better wife, a better mother, a better father, a better girlfriend, boyfriend, son, daughter, friend, colleague, co-worker, everything when you're loving God the way that you should. And so don't think, oh, that person's difficult. It's got nothing to do with my relationship with God. Don't think, oh, I don't like that person. They've got nothing to do with my relationship with God. On the contrary, instead, love God. Focus your life through prayer, Bible reading, gathering with God's people on God, on your vertical relationship. And then, don't forget to also be intentional in the horizontal one. If you be a good friend to people, you will make good friends. If you're a good husband, a good wife, you will generally find the spouse returns the compliment and returns the favour. Don't think these relationships will happen accidentally. They won't. What you need in your life is intentional love and care. And thankfully for us, we have that model to us in Jesus. Secondly, and very, very importantly, when all of this coronavirus is over, I'd love to challenge you and encourage you to commit back to the gathering of God's people. You know, the very first church we have in the Bible is what we just read about. Two people, God's people, gathered together around God. And if you flick all the way to the end of the Bible, the book of Revelation, what do you have? God's people gathered together with God at the center. You were designed for community, for a supernatural community as Christian people to gather together. And maybe you've been a 30, 40, 60, 80% church attender. Church is something that you do when you want, or when you want to do it, when you feel like doing it. My friends, hear what God is saying today. You were created to fulfill other people's needs. When you're not here, when you're not gathering, when you're choosing not to gather in circles, in small groups, or in rows on a Sunday, you're taking away what God designs for other people. Commit yourself to gathering. It really, really matters. And the final thing I want to say to you is if you're not a Christian this morning, or as we've spoken and you've heard about this relationship with God and you've realized, I'm not sure I've got that, I'd love to encourage you to come along to our upcoming Explaining Christianity course. Explaining Christianity is a course where we look at the basics of Jesus, his life, and what that means for your life. It's very, very easy to register. You can do so on the link provided. I will be there. There'll be a few people from church doing it via Zoom. It'll be a non-threatening environment. But we'd love to encourage you to do it because this really matters, and you matter to God. And what a great thing to spend your time in isolation doing, reconciling with the God who made you.